99% of all animal species are born knowing exactly how to mate. A wolf doesn't need instructions, but imagine you are the very first conscious human. You are hungry, so you eat. You are tired, so you sleep. But there is no internal voice telling you how to create another human being. No biological manual. If an ancient human was raised in total isolation, they wouldn't even know what sex is. Evolution simply forgot to program our most important survival mechanism. So how did we figure out the one act required to keep the species alive? Most people assume that human sexuality is the deepest, most primal instinct we possess. It isn't. It is actually one of our weakest. To understand why, you have to look at how the rest of the animal kingdom actually operates. When a female dog goes into heat, she doesn't make a conscious choice. Her biology releases a massive wave of pheromones. The male dog doesn't think about what he's doing. His olfactory system detects the chemical signal, and an automatic, hardwired subroutine in his brain takes over. He is essentially a biological machine executing a line of pre-written code. The exact same is true for mice, for birds, for cats, and for almost every lower mammal on the planet. They do not learn how to mate. The knowledge is pre-installed in the hardware. But humans are different. Somewhere along our evolutionary timeline, roughly 2 to 3 million years ago, our ancestors underwent a radical physiological shift. We lost the strict estrus cycle. Human females do not go into a visible, chemically obvious heat. We lost the vomeronasal organ, the specific part of the mammalian nose designed to detect mating pheromones. The hardware was uninstalled. Evolution made a terrifying gamble. It traded rigid, pre-programmed instincts for a larger, more flexible cerebral cortex. It gave us neuroplasticity. It gave us the ability to reason, to adapt, and to build. But in doing so, it deleted the manual for our own reproduction. If you feel a biological urge today, you know exactly what to do with it because you grew up in a society saturated with information. You have the internet, you have movies, you have biology classes, you have thousands of years of accumulated cultural knowledge quietly guiding your behavior. But take away the culture, take away the language, strip humanity down to the absolute bare metal of its biology. What happens then? Science actually has an answer to this question, and it is incredibly disturbing. In the mid-20th century, psychologists began running experiments to see exactly how much of primate behavior was instinct and how much was learned. The most infamous of these were conducted by Harry Harlow in the 1950s and 60s. Harlow took newborn rhesus macaques, primates with brains highly similar to our own, and raised them in total isolation. They were given food, they were given water, they physically developed into perfectly healthy adults, but they never saw another monkey. When these isolated macaques reached sexual maturity, Harlow introduced them to normal, socialized monkeys of the opposite sex. The results were catastrophic. The isolated monkeys experienced the physical urges of puberty. Their hormones spiked. They felt the biological drive, but they had absolutely no idea what to do with it. When a receptive female approached an isolated male, he didn't know how to respond. Some of them sat on the floor and rocked back and forth. Some became violently aggressive. Some tried to fight the females. They fumbled. They panicked. They were trapped in bodies demanding an action that their brains simply didn't know how to perform. In the entire history of the experiment, not a single one of the completely isolated macaques ever successfully reproduced. Not one. Their biological hardware was completely functional, but the software was missing. This is the terrifying reality of being a higher primate. For a rat, reproduction is an instinct. For a monkey, an ape, or a human being, reproduction is a learned skill. It requires observation. It requires imitation. It requires a society. Which brings us back to the very beginning. If an isolated primate literally cannot figure out how to reproduce on its own, how did the first humans do it? How did our ancestors avoid going extinct the moment they lost their hardwired mating instincts? The answer is something anthropologists call cultural transmission, and it means the survival of the human race relied entirely on something we now consider deeply taboo. Our ancestors had to watch. Before privacy existed, before clothes, before the concept of shame was ever invented, human life was entirely public. Early hominids lived in tight-knit bands of 20 to 50 individuals. They slept huddled together in caves or under rock overhangs for warmth and protection from predators. In that environment, there were no secrets. When the adults in the tribe mated, the younger members saw it. They witnessed the mechanics of it long before their own bodies were physically capable of performing it. Your brain is uniquely equipped for this. You possess something called mirror neurons. When you watch someone perform an action, the mirror neurons in your brain fire in the exact same pattern as if you were performing the action yourself. This is how humans learn to make tools. It's how infants learn to speak by watching their mother's mouth. And it is exactly how ancient humans learned to reproduce. The first conscious humans didn't invent reproduction. They inherited the knowledge visually from the generation before them, who inherited it from the proto-humans before them, in an unbroken chain of observation stretching back millions of years, back to a time when it actually was an instinct. The instinct slowly faded out, but the visual memory kept being passed down. We We replaced biology with culture. We traded an automatic reflex for a social tradition. It is perhaps the most dangerous evolutionary trade-off in the history of life on Earth. But then, something shifted. As human civilization advanced, we began to build walls. We invented agriculture, which led to permanent settlements, which led to private dwellings. We invented clothes. We invented religion, and with it, the concept of modesty and shame. Within a geological blink of an eye, the act of reproduction was moved from the communal fire into the dark, private rooms of closed-off houses. The chain of visual observation that kept our species alive for 2 million years was suddenly broken. So how did we survive the invention of privacy? We started talking. When humans could no longer show the next generation how to survive, they had to describe it. Reproduction shifted from a visual transmission to an oral one. Parents had to explain it to their children, elders had to pass down the knowledge through stories, through rituals, and eventually through written manuals and biological texts. We built an entire educational infrastructure just to replace the visual learning we had locked away behind closed doors. But think about how fragile that makes us. We are the apex predator of this planet. We split the atom. We walked on the moon. But if you were to take a group of human infants, put them on a deserted island with a machine that automatically fed and protected them, and let them grow into adults without ever exposing them to human culture, they would die out. They might figure out how to build a shelter. They might figure out how to gather food. But when puberty hit, they would be just like Harlow's monkeys, confused, frustrated, and entirely incapable of sustaining the species. They would experience the drive, but lack the architecture to execute it. They would simply age and die, and that would be the end of the human story. We exist on a knife's edge. Every other animal is bolted securely to the earth by its biology. We are floating above it, tethered only by the things we teach each other. You are alive today not because your ancestors possessed some unstoppable primal urge to multiply. You are alive because they watched, they learned, and they remembered. Your very existence is not the result of a biological guarantee. It is the result of a cultural inheritance. We like to think of ourselves as independent, highly evolved beings. We think our bodies know what they are doing. But the truth is, beneath the surface, we are entirely dependent on the collective memory of the species. Without it, your brain is a blank slate trapped in a machine it doesn't know how to operate. Next time you think about human nature, remember this. The most fundamental part of who you are, the very mechanism that created you, isn't actually in your DNA. It's just a story we've been showing each other in the dark for 300,000 years, and if we ever forget how to tell it, we disappear.